Good day and welcome. I'm Jack Van Horn from the University of Virginia, and I am delighted to welcome you to this edition of our 2021-2022 Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series. This lecture series is supported by UVA's Integrated Translational Health Institute of Virginia, the UVA Brain Institute, the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Data Science, and through a grant from the National Institutes of General Medical Sciences. This year's theme is Ethical Challenges of Artificial Intelligence in Biomedicine, where every Friday we enjoy presentations from leading thinkers about the promise, the opportunities, and the hurdles associated with AI applications in the biomedical sciences. Selected participants in our Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab program will leverage these presentations as vital material for our culminating in-person grant project development workshop to be held here in historic Charlottesville, Virginia in June. Today, I am delighted to welcome our speaker, Dr. Alison L from Washington University in St. Louis. Alison is an associate professor and an organizational psychologist with a focus on the ethical conduct of research. She is the assistant director of the Center for Clinical and Research Ethics, where she co-directs a responsible conduct community of research scholars, teaches courses, and holds other activities for the folks at Washington University. She also teaches courses on ethics and professionalism in research, as well as in biostatistics. She has a specific interest in the role of leadership, management practices, and workplace behavior in conducting high quality, responsible research, and is interested in the societal impact of that research. In particular, she has conducted her own research on the best practices in ethics education and the assessment of ethics courses. She is a co-investigator on the professional and social issues in the Professional and Social Issues Lab, which focuses on research examining factors that foster and hinder research integrity and practical interventions aimed at enhancing professionalism and ethical decision-making in research. In continuing our 2021-2022 Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series theme, Alison's lecture today is entitled Ethical Interactions in Scientific Teams as a Foundation for Ethical AI. Alison's lecture will explore the individual factors and the interpersonal dynamics which influence, shape, and which guide the ethical norms and behavior of scientific teams. And she will make the case that ethical interactions within teams is essential for the ethical development and deployment of AI innovations. Her lecture will discuss challenges which arise in multidisciplinary teams and strategies for navigating those challenges. As always, we are streaming this lecture live and for recording via YouTube. And if you are watching via YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Also, our specially selected 2021-2022 Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab participants are encouraged to submit any questions for Alison via the chat feature in their Zoom sessions. I'll synthesize these questions. I'll ask them in the last 10 minutes or so of Alison's lecture. And with that, Alison, welcome. We are so excited to hear from you today. We've really been looking forward to your lecture. Thanks so much.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing my talk with you today and then getting some good discussion going towards the end. So just a great introduction. Thank you so much for that. This next slide here just shows you a couple of my papers looking at leadership and management and research, as you noted. And then I also do some work in the space of public perceptions and research participant and patient perceptions of the use of AI in healthcare. And as you noted, I'm at Washington University in St. Louis on the medical campus in the Bioethics Research Center, which is our newer name. And I conduct empirical research funded by NSF and NIH in the center. I also wanted to mention two of the professional development and training programs that I'm involved in. One is called the Professionalism and Integrity and Research Program. This is a coaching program for researchers who have issues in their research laboratories and their centers that they direct or in their teams. And so today's presentation is going to pull together my own experience as a researcher, leading research and being a research team, my experience studying behaviors in the research environment, especially leadership and management, and my experience coaching researchers who have challenges that come up. So examples would be issues with data integrity that ultimately lead to retractions, issues with submissions that lead to investigation by federal funding agencies, So these researchers are really looking to pick themselves back up and get their careers back on track. And we always say that they're really great researchers and they missed, some of the details, some of the important features, and then things escalate and become problematic. So I really like pulling together what contributes to effective research teams and then looking into these issues and these challenges and thinking about how all these things triangulate to these same kind of stories about what contributes to effective ethical research. And then this other program I'm involved with is so new that it doesn't even have a logo yet, and the name Compass is mostly solidified, but we're still exploring and making sure it's the way to go. So this is a program that's funded by NIH to help train and develop junior faculty and postdocs in leadership and management skills as they're navigating the early stages of their career. So this will be open nationally to all researchers who meet that general criteria, biomedical investigators, and who are junior faculty or postdocs. And it'll provide training around leadership and management skills, and it'll also allow the opportunity for mentoring both in peer groups and from experienced researchers who have already been there and done that. So just wanted to tell you about those programs and make that point that I'm pulling together my own research, my own experience, and then my experience training and developing researchers. So what are we going to do in this talk? I'm going to make the case that ethical interactions within teams are essential for the ethical development and deployment of AI intervention. So I'm going to talk about what do I mean by ethical interaction? What does that mean? What does ethical interaction mean in teams? Then I'm going to make the point that individual and team behaviors and dynamics drive scientific excellence and ethical research and innovation. And I want to talk about what do these behaviors and dynamics look like. And then finally, I want to get practical. I really like to do that where I take my research and then I start looking at how do we apply it. So I'm going to give you some practical suggestions and some tips and some guides, some checklists, and talk you through that. And hopefully these will be of value to you in the future. So I'm known in the center and on campus as the relationships matter person, which I'm willing to accept that as my how I'm known, and soon you will see why. First, I'd like to share some statements with you for you to reflect on. When I have ideas, I know that I can share them and people will listen. When I have concerns about a project, I feel comfortable bringing them up. When others share their work, I know they value my input and feedback. I can count on team members to give me constructive and valuable input and feedback. When something goes wrong, my team members band together to figure it out. I feel like my contribution matters to my team members. If something bad happens in my life, it's okay to say that I'm struggling. If something positive happens in my life, it's okay for me to express excitement. I'm not worried about what others think of me. I feel that I can be myself in this team. So just reflect on those statements for a second. These are statements that a person in a psychologically safe work environment would make. In this kind of environment, you feel and believe that your team expects you to speak up. That's just how your team does things. You believe others will give you the benefit of the doubt. If you challenge something, take a risk, or make a mistake, you're able to talk about problems and concerns, learn from failure, and openly share ideas, no matter your status or hierarchy in the team. You can be yourself without fear of judgment. Just to say a little bit more about what is psychological safety at work. It's a shared belief held by members of a team that others in the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you for speaking up. CCL is a major, Center for Creative Leadership is a major leadership development organization that's very evidence-based. And one of their chief officers said people feel comfortable being themselves. They bring their full self to work and feel okay laying all of themselves on the line. So in this kind of environment, people feel they can voice undeveloped thoughts. They're not fully formed yet. They can ask naive and seemingly random questions. They can brainstorm out loud, and they can give and receive constructive feedback. Many of you have enough experience in the research environment that you're starting to see, wow, those seem like important features of doing effective science, being able to have those things happening. It is important to note, this doesn't mean that everyone is is super positive and nice all the time. Like, that doesn't mean there's never any kind of conflict or clashing or tension that comes up. It's just that you can speak about it and you know that you're going to work it through and that your team has your back and you have their back. And there's emerging work and conversation around not only the importance of psychological safety for fostering innovation and effectiveness at work, but also that it's fundamentally about inclusion, because in order to be included and feel like you can learn and grow and that you can speak up and ask random questions, you have to have this kind of environment. So it's really creating a kind of environment that establishes all these features of what we're really hoping to have in scientific teams. We're hoping to have people who feel like they can be their whole selves. They can bring all of their talents and skills. They can speak up. They can ask good questions. And as you know, this is even more essential in multidisciplinary teams because you're all coming from different disciplines. You have different languages. And so when someone uses an acronym or jargon that you don't understand, you need to be like, hey, what the heck is that? I need to, that comfortability to speak up and ask those random questions and to bring up those what if questions as you're going about your work. So that's what it feels like to be in this kind of environment. That's what psychologically safety feels like, and that's what it is at the individual level. But what creates psychological safety at work? The short answer is a positive team climate. So positive team climate is the basis of psychological safety at work, and a positive team climate is characterized by interpersonal interactions that have trust, respect, openness, transparency and honesty, information sharing, exchange of perspectives, and support. And you can see that, yeah, this is good for people. This makes people feel like they can be their full selves. It fosters well-being and engagement and inclusion at work, but it's also essential to innovation and responsible science. So these features equal ethical interaction. And we'll get in the weeds in a few minutes about what are the behaviors and practices and the things that need to be happening on the ground day to day to create that kind of environment. So before I do that, I want to just say a little bit more about ethical AI development. So that kind of positive team climate with those kinds of interactions are the basis of ethical innovation. And if you strip it all the way back, it's ultimately because we need to hear all the voices all the time across the AI development pipeline, from discovery to deployment. We need to hear from older and younger members of our team, all levels of experience, all levels of expertise, from technicians to content experts and also ethicists, community members, everybody with different backgrounds, life experiences, cultures, and from different communities, so that all of the considerations that need to be looked at in designing and deploying these tools are brought to the table, and that everybody has equal chance to bring up these concerns and bring these ideas there. Because we're trying to solve really complex problems in society with a lot of these tools and a lot of AI development, and the teams that are doing that are really complex. And my next slide, I just want to say a little bit more about what is ethical data science and AI innovation in biomedicine. So what does that mean? To design, deploy, and develop, and deploy AI applications and tools that are ethical. Lots of people are trying to answer this question right now, and I kind of tried to summarize what I'm seeing in the literature. This isn't everything, but this is a good way to kind of start thinking about it. It's respect and benefit. It's developing AI applications and tools that respect and benefit the communities that provide data and attend to their preferences, safely and equitably contributing to human well-being, health access, and health outcomes, and adhering along the way to fundamental ethical principles such as respect, fairness, privacy, non-discrimination, transparency, and ensuring that we do good to others, that we avoid harm, and that we provide benefit, and following any legal or regulatory requirements along the way. One of the challenges that we have right now in this space is that legal and regulatory concerns are related to some AI innovations and the use of big data in biomedicine lag behind some of the technical advancements that we're able to achieve at this time. And so it's going to be interesting to see in the next 5 to 10 years how globally and in the US we address this problem. But these concepts, they resonate, I assume, they sound good, respect and benefit and safety and equity, but putting those ideals into practice requires day-to-day behavior, and that's sometimes difficult to think about. How do we take from this desire? Researchers want to do good work. That's 99.9% of the time why they're doing the work they're doing. They want to do good work, they want to do the right thing, they want to make positive impact on society, and these are important and good ideals, but it requires that day-to-day practice. And that's why I'm saying attending to ethical interactions as just an absolute fundamental component is a great first step in the right direction. I have one more slide that takes us a little bit more on a detour from the central emphasis on relationships that I want to share with you, because this is sometimes a source of confusion for researchers. I was going to say maybe especially early career researchers, but I would just say researchers in general. So my colleague and I wrote this paper where we were talking about when people talk about ethics in research, depending on the stakeholders' focus, sometimes they mean different things. And it can kind of cause a sense of confusion of like, what am I looking at here in this space? So we argued that in today's environment, there are kind of 5 ways that people mean research ethics. So there's normative ethics. So that's like your traditional, maybe philosopher ethicists. They look at the classic sense of determining what's right and wrong in biomedicine, trying to establish guiding principles of what makes an action or activity in the biomedical space acceptable or unacceptable. So that's sort of that philosophical, what's right or wrong. Then some stakeholders in the research environment, especially institutional officials, they think about compliance, making sure that we follow applicable research regulations, laws, rules, and policies, such as ensuring consent forms, ensuring consent. That's another way that research ethics is kind of conceptualized and meant. And again, it goes back to stakeholders. The third is the idea that we've got to do science that's reliable and trustworthy, and that our methods must be sound. So you guys have seen, as young researchers, the emphasis on rigor and reproducibility that's just exploded in the last 5 to 7, maybe 10 years. My time concept is a little different now that the pandemic's happened, 2 years. I think probably 7 to 10 years now. Another dimension that's been emphasized, we wrote this paper in 2018, and I've only seen it explode, especially with the pandemic. The meaning that ethical research is research that has social value. So it's addressing problems important to society and engaging relevant stakeholders, and doing so in a way that's equitable and is addressing, providing benefit to the communities and the people that really need that benefit. And then the fifth is kind of the thrust of the presentation today, which is workplace relationships. So there's a risk to science when relationships sour, and we must really genuinely care about the perspectives of multiple stakeholders in research, particularly as we're trying to tackle even more complex problems with more complex methods. So I'm essentially arguing that there's these multiple meanings of research ethics, and sometimes that can make it confusing for researchers, like exactly what are we talking about? But all of these are important for AI, ethical AI development and deployment. And the other point is that we were arguing in this paper that the way we treat each other, ethical interactions, is an ethical issue in and of itself. And you're seeing that more and more, even among calls for proposals among NIH, wanting to know, how are you going to establish a safe and supportive work environment? How are you going to provide for an inclusive environment where everybody's talents are able to be developed and able to be brought to the table? So the point is that this is both a component of ethical research, and it fosters all of the other pieces. So that's why I really focus on it today. But in some of my practical advice and checklists, I'm really speaking to multiple of these different meanings of ethical research. So going back, that was my kind of detour to what is ethical AI and what are these different meanings of research ethics. Going back to this idea, we need to hear all voices across the AI development pipeline to achieve ethical innovation. Most people agree with it, but this is a classic scenario of easier said than done. The same things that make innovation possible, having younger and older perspectives, having different levels of expertise, engaging different content experts, community members, ethicists, technicians, people with different backgrounds. The same thing that makes innovation possible also makes it hard. doing this well, it takes intention. It takes interpersonal skills and it takes leadership skills. And I know that you've heard sort of this theme, at least in one or two other of the talks that you've had in this series. I was able to see some good presentations. And so I guess I'm here to say I agree and add. Just to kind of go a little bit further down this path of what gets in the way of cultivating positive interpersonal interactions in team climate. One is time. Time is a finite resource, and it takes some time to attend to these matters and prioritizing it as something that's essential to doing good research. Most of us are overextended and limited time, and we often think about building relationships. Maybe that doesn't feel like it's getting work done, and we have so many requirements and demands on us that we kind of focus on the do, tasks, and even the nature of communication and meetings can sort of get a little bit less than desirable when you're just so strapped for time. You're just trying to get down in the nuts and bolts. You can be shorter with people, for example, without even really meaning to or having any ill intent. Lack of adequate team planning, coordination, and leadership. Again, some of that is because it takes time and prioritization. Also, it takes skills, and many of us are not trained in these aspects of doing research. And the reason that planning and coordination and leadership are essential to interpersonal interactions is it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, to have a positive team climate if people don't have clarity about their role and they don't have access to the information that they need and the resources and the tools and the help and the support and the team interaction that they need to actually be effective in what they're trying to contribute to the team. So you have to get the team dynamic of the planning and the coordination right when you're trying to ensure that you create positive interactions in team climate. The third point is that we lack sort of just the chance to sit back and think about communication strategies and perspective taking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And just the lack of know-how about how to cultivate these interactions, because it hasn't been as much emphasized in the last, in training scientists, and now it's just exploding in terms of what people are talking about its importance, which is good to see. But on the upside, scientists have curiosity and they have an eagerness to learn, and I think that puts us into a great position to start to think about how do we make the time, how do we prioritize, how are we going to be effective with team planning and coordination, how to be effective with leadership and communication. So that's sort of my pep talk. This slide here tries to sort of conceptualize building from some of the literature of like, what are all the features that go into an effective scientific team? On the left with box 1, that's your team structures. Like what disciplinary knowledge are you bringing to the table? What expertise and background are you bringing to the table? What are the roles and what's the composition of the teams? Maybe it's multi-teams contributing to a larger collaboration. And what are the project goals and objectives? So that's your research planning and team formation. And then I'm going to jump to 4. What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to have some productivity, quality of work, innovation, ethical research, and we're trying to create an environment where people feel a sense of contribution and satisfaction. And then in the middle is what I'm sharing with you today. This idea that we need to create space for team planning and maintenance, and we need to think about individual behaviors. And that individual behaviors bucket, I'm going to focus on communication strategies and perspective taking. And in the team behaviors and norms bucket, I'm going to share with you practical advice around establishing goals and expectations, information sharing and participation, productive conflict, shared communication norms, and leadership. And I have this gray sort of box to represent positive team climate. So positive team climate is both created by the behaviors and norms in both of these two blue boxes, the team behaviors and norms and the individual behaviors and norms. And it's also reinforced by, and then those behaviors and norms are also reinforced by a positive team climate. So it's sort of like a self-fulfilling feedback loop where creating a good environment fosters even more of the things we want, and doing the things we want creates that kind of environment. And that's why if we start with team planning and goal setting up front and try to be strategic and intentional, we're better able to think about creating the kind of environment that we want to see. So now I'm going to shift. So let's get practical. So as I mentioned on that last slide with the two boxes in the middle, I'm going to talk about team behaviors and norms, and I'm going to talk about individual behaviors. So in the team behaviors and norms section, I pulled together a checklist built from my research and from some of the research on multidisciplinary collaboration and team science. I tried to pull together a checklist that would represent important features and components of team planning and maintenance over time. I think it has 10 items. I pulled together a team checklist, a team kickoff checklist, sort of that initial meeting that you might have, or it may even take a couple meetings to really kick off. And then I pulled together a team ethics checklist at the risk of making ethics look like it's separate from 1 and 2 rather than integrated. I wanted to kind of spell out what are the kinds of things we can be doing in scientific teams to think about ethics in the day-to-day, on the ground, day-to-day practice. And then for individual behaviors, I have example statements of for communicating different types of things that you would need to communicate in scientific teams. And these would be relevant to individual team members across the spectrum, and especially relevant to team leaders, because team leaders set the tone. They lead by example. So having these statements coming from team leaders helps to foster that sort of like, okay, that's how we do things here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about perspective taking as an underlying important thrust and skill in interpersonal interaction and communication style. Okay, so I'm going to split this checklist, this team planning and maintenance checklist, into 2 slides, 10 items total. And then on the right side, I kind of tried to illustrate the domain that I'm speaking to with each of these items. And I created this so that it reflects both team planning. So our team has a plan for, and then our team has, which would be maintenance, more of the long-term ongoing component where you would want to continue to have these things in place and evaluate them over time. So the first 2 are related to meetings. What's the plan for meetings? What's the frequency and what's the agreed upon modality? Having meeting agendas and note-taking to document important decisions that are made in meetings. Maybe you don't actually need like verbatim meeting notes, but documenting decisions and issues that are coming up is becoming even more and more important as teams get bigger and collaborations become more complex. So I really want to emphasize the value of these 2 things. And in my experience coaching researchers, the things I've seen happen when teams don't meet enough. You go off and do your tasks, and it's like, oh, we don't have time to meet. And there's definitely a world in which you can meet too much. But even if you're doing 15, 30-minute check-ins with individuals or as a collective team, meetings really provide a lot of value and are a good use of time if you're able to make them effective. Then I have, what's the plan for coordination of day-to-day activities, and then any kind of daily ad hoc as needed communication within the team? What's the plan for making sure that there's clarification for all team members regarding what their roles and expectations are, and that we revisit them over time? And then the last is really valuable, strongly recommend some kind of team operating manual or collaborative agreement describing the plan, the expectations, essentially how the team as members will operate. I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, because this is something that you could actually go over in a kickoff. And also the other thing I'll say, I'll go ahead and say it now, it's important to have something like this, but it doesn't matter if no one knows it exists or you don't discuss it collaboratively or there's no sort of shared buy-in that like, this is a thing we have that helps guide our operations and we should know it exists and be sensitive to it. And even it can change and grow over time. So now I'll move on to 6 through 10. And these focus on, the first 2 focus on leadership and management. So what's the plan for how leaders and who will oversee progress and interact with each other. So if you have multiple teams or project teams that are being managed, you got to have a consideration of how those different projects are going to interact with each other over time to both discuss project milestones, but also just how the teaming process is working. An essential component of leading and managing science that is really time consuming and is hard is there's got to be some sort of structure and plan for leaders and managers who are verifying that the plans and the procedures that we've agreed to operationally are being followed, that there's feedback being provided on the science itself and the procedures, and that any obstacles that arise are removed. And trying to do that proactively versus reactively is really key. Being conscious about a plan, number 8, for training and professional development for all team members to foster their effectiveness in their roles. And then ongoing team process quality improvement with time explicitly set aside for this. Maybe it's once a month at first, or once every 6 weeks, or once a quarter, or once every 6 months, or once a year once you're really going. But looking at what's our process quality improvement and taking time to reflect on that. Even something as simple as like, are we meeting enough? Are we meeting too much? Should we restructure our team meetings? Are the wrong people at the meetings? Do we need other people at the meetings? Those are important issues that need to be reflected on over time. And then number 10, onboarding. This is something scientific teams tend to struggle with a bit because it is really time intensive, but bringing everybody into the fold in terms of daily operations. Again, how are we going to function? And one of the tricks here is that the team can change over time. So people are offboarding and onboarding, especially when you think about students and trainees who are contributing to scientific projects. And that newcomer doesn't have the same perspective as the person that's been there. And trying to get them up to speed takes a lot of intention, especially if maybe the kickoff was truly a kickoff for the beginning of a 4-year project or a 5-year project or even a 2-year project. Now you don't have another kickoff. How do you get that newcomer up to speed? That's where your operating manual, your collaborative agreement that spells out rules, expectations can provide sort of this living document that is something that can be used for onboarding during a kickoff and then onboarding newcomers over time. And then my last checklist item is just to kind of remind you, this is not necessarily 100% exhaustive, nor will it meet everybody's needs. But these are really essential features that I would strongly encourage that you're thinking about with team planning and then maintenance over time. So now I'm going to move to, I think it's a 9-point checklist related to team kickoff meeting. So a team kickoff, all of this is really in that domain. It's in multiple domains, but like coordination, project team coordination, communication, leadership, and onboarding. So here's my recommendations of the things you would want to ensure that you're covering in a kickoff. You've discussed all plans, norms, and expectations on the team planning and maintenance checklist. So like you've discussed everything that's on the prior thing that you've already kind of spelled out and defined about operations and how the team's going to function. You've shared and discussed that operating manual or collaborative agreement, and this could be revised or additions could be added with input even that comes up in the checklist, like, hey, I noticed this, why don't we think about adding this idea, or how are we going to navigate different issues that come up? Heard from the project leadership and management team about their leadership and teamwork style and philosophy, sort of setting some of that groundwork for that climate that you're trying to create up front. One of the things that effective leaders do is they say out loud what they value, prioritize, and care about. And so I just can't emphasize enough the value of just a few sentences, a few words. It doesn't have to be an hour-long speech. A few sentences and a few words about how you want the team work, the team environment to look and function, and how that's really important to you to hear from everybody and have everybody's voice at the table. Really helps to foster that sense of what are we trying to achieve here in terms of the way we're going to work as a team. 4, communicated about the known strengths and limitations of the disciplines involved, and anticipated potential sources of past conflict. So actually getting people engaged in conversations around how their disciplines function technically and how their disciplines operate and see the world is really, really valuable, because you only know your discipline. You only know your kind of lens, your experience. And starting to have people think about the strengths and limitations of their own discipline is really valuable, and then having that crosstalk about that, especially if you're engaging people that you're not used to collaborating with, such as social scientists or ethicists. Having everybody getting to speak up, like, this is how my discipline works and why and how, and here are some limitations, really starts to get people to understand sort of, okay, we're not all coming at this the same. That's what we want. Again, the things that make scientific multidisciplinary teams effective and able to innovate are also the things that make it hard at times. Point 5 is hearing from all team members at all levels about their experience or their expertise and their interests, so that other team members know. If you bring together all the greatest technicians and all the greatest content experts and all the experts that you can to achieve the research goals, but people don't know who have what expertise or what interest, it makes it hard to tap into the right expertise at the right time. So creating that shared mental kind of understanding of who knows what, and also just who's interested in what, because sometimes project needs come up where somebody's willing to tackle a new aspect of a project or explore a new issue, and that's just something that they're just kind of like a pet thing, and they get that opportunity, and that helps develop people within the team and engage them and make them feel like they're contributing. Okay, and then my last 6 through 9. Whenever we write research proposals, if you're doing research that's funded, we establish goals and objectives. We establish milestones and timelines. But I can't tell you, I mean, most of you have done projects, so you've probably seen this. Like, you have it written and you wrote it and it looks beautiful and it scored well and it's awarded, but you still have to revisit those because everyone didn't necessarily see that last, and wasn't necessarily involved with writing all the elements of the proposal. And also things shift and change over time. It's been months since you wrote that, so revisiting it is really valuable. Versus just like saying, go read the proposal. Everything you need to know is there. It's a great idea to have everyone read the proposal, but also establishing and reestablishing goals, objectives, milestones, timelines is really valuable. Discussing as a group ethics as a priority and the ethical concerns and issues that we think might be relevant to our project. So again, I said before, researchers want to do the right thing. They care about research, about research ethics, and they care about their work having an impact on society and being of value. And I mentioned that those ideals are fantastic. The trick starts to become, how do we make that happen in the day-to-day on the ground with our own projects? So prioritizing it and discussing it explicitly is one important step in the right direction there. I said before, talk about your disciplines and possible areas of task conflict. 8 is a very related concept, discussing potential challenges in the teams, like different languages and jargon and the disciplines that are represented across the team. And then 9, this goes back to establishing expectations for the team environment from the beginning, talking about how there's negative forms of conflict and positive forms of task conflict. And we want to minimize the negative and encourage debate and productive conflict, and how that's actually critical to innovating and achieving the project goals. So again, saying out loud some of these things that those of us who have worked in the research environment know to be true because we've seen them over time, but making it explicit for everyone and is really helpful when we're kicking off the project. And then my next and final checklist for you guys is an ethics checklist. I went ahead and crammed this all into one slide, so forgive me for the wordiness. I tried to bold, although I'm not sure it shows up that well on the slide, the key pieces of each of these elements. This is not exhaustive, but these are some of the key features. And again, these points cross those 5 dimensions of compliant, broader rigor and research normative ethics issues. So the first is Maybe there's an agenda item at team meetings, or at least some routine meeting focused on broader consequences of data and analysis practices. We discuss at team meetings emerging or potential ethical concerns. Team leaders talk about ethics and the value of it, and research rigor as an essential priority when doing the work. This fourth one is one, if you do have compliance elements to your research project, it's important that even though we know that sometimes compliance elements to a project, especially if you're using human data that's not de-identified and you have to get an IRB involved, can be burden. It's just a reality. But the way we talk about compliance within our project teams really does start to shape an attitude around what it means to be a responsible scientist. And we found in some of our work that kind of keeping a positive attitude, even if acknowledging, oh, this is frustrating or a burden, but seeing it as an essential part of doing good, responsible research is important. It relates pretty well to this idea of the two down about regarding compliance offices, resources, and staff as supporters of research, not adversaries. So I do some other work talking to the people on that side of the scientific enterprise, the people who are interested in compliance and regulation. And one of their biggest notes is sometimes researchers see us as like adversaries when really we're trying to support research. We're trying to ensure that researchers are able to do research in a way that complies with rules and regulations and keeps them out of trouble, keeps their team out of trouble, and keeps our institution out of trouble, and allows us to be accountable to these rules and to the public and create trust. I have listed here engaging ethicists throughout the entire research life cycle, especially from the beginning, but really throughout. And if you're identifying potential consequences that are of concern in a project, bringing them in at some point is really something to consider and is important and contribute to your guys' ability to sort through the issue. Engaging community stakeholders whenever feasible, so getting perspectives outside of the research team. If you've never worked with community members or other stakeholders outside of the team on a project, it's just so illuminating to hear from them and their vantage point, because they can bring up broader consequences or questions that can really affect our thinking about the problem or our thinking about the data, and bringing those voices up in when possible along this life cycle is really valuable. The last few points, I have one about authorship, because we're all tend to be pretty conscious of authorship credit, and so discussions that are explicit about that are valuable. And then the last two, documentation, written procedures, written procedures, written procedures. I'm going to say that 3 times. Again, this goes back to prioritization and time. We're rushing through, but project teams need standards and written procedures that are also monitored and followed up on for data, everything data documentation, data security, data sharing, data backup, everything along a data's life cycle, along the pipeline. We've got to have expected standards and procedures for that, and be checking in that our team is following those. And again, if the project has any research compliance requirements, having standards and written procedures for following those requirements and documentation that those requirements have been followed is really valuable, especially in large, complex, multidisciplinary teams. So those are all of my practical tips related to team behaviors and norms, and trying to kind of drill down of like what would be the practices and the things we would need to be attending to. And then my next few slides speak to the individual. So it's going to feel like a shift, but it's intentional. So now we're going to shift, and on this first slide, I have communication functions on the left, and I have example statements on the right. And these are sort of more of your task-focused communication. So I have encouraging participation, managing conflict, handling mistakes, and clarifying expectations. And I have an asterisk there, especially good for managing up. So the concept of managing up, you may have heard of it from people call it like managing your boss, or it could be managing your mentor, is the idea that sometimes people who are, is the idea that you're using skills, like some of these communication skills, to bring out the best in yourself as a member of the team. So I say that clarifying expectations is really useful for managing up, because sometimes when you're, depending on where you are on the team, there just simply may be unclarified expectations. You may be concerned that you're not on the same page. So having these strategies of asking directly is really valuable to trying to get that kind of clarification. So I'm just going to give an example or two for each of these. Hopefully these slides will be a resource reference for you in future, which I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share them. So encouraging participation. Imagine sitting around a meeting table asking, what are we missing? What other suggestions do you have? Saying, this is new for us. We need everybody's input. Managing conflict. I think these are all nice statements. It seems like we're seeing this differently. Will you tell me more about your perspective on this? If it's a little contentious, you could say, I know we're not seeing eye to eye on this issue now, but I'm optimistic we can work it out. If it's even more contentious and uncomfortable, starting the conversation when you're in a more tense kind of conflict is often the hardest part. So you could start with, it is difficult for me to raise this concern, and while whatever issue may not be intentional, this is upsetting for me. Let's talk about it more. And then the last one is just, I appreciate the opportunity to explore this issue with you. Handling mistakes. Some of the work I've done has shown that the way that project teams and project team leaders handle mistakes is really a key feature in creating a psychologically safe work environment. Because remember, part of that is knowing, like, if you do mess up, that you're going to be able to raise that issue and talk about it. And I've seen lack of front end, lack of handling mistakes well early on, ballooning into problems in my experience coaching researchers. So when a mistake comes to the forefront, saying something like, what can we do to resolve this problem? What can we learn from this? Or if it's if you're like really down about it, which I think this is almost exactly something I said within the first month of one of the projects I launched recently, because one of the newcomers to the team and to the center made a mistake. His face was just so upset. And I was like, this is not how we hoped this launch of this recruitment feature or recruitment process of the project would go, but we'll figure it out. And his whole face changed. Like, okay, she's not angry, but I was not happy either. So that's why I was like, not how we hoped it'd go, but we'll figure it out. Then things for clarifying expectations, be things like, let me repeat what I think we're planning to do. Then we can discuss or fill in any gaps. And there's other examples there. The second list of communication functions, these are more relationship focused. So definitely the way you handle those task-focused communications on the previous slide influence and inform relationship building, but these are more expressly about relationships. Expressing appreciation, I really appreciate your work on this. Providing support and encouragement, what helps you need, or you can do this, I'm confident in you. And then just connecting with people, just getting to know people for who they are. Who are the biggest influences on your career so far, and why? What do you like most about this project or this work? And then perspective taking is sort of like the cognitive twin of emotional empathy, where empathy is like a more affective, you're feeling other people's feelings. And perspective taking is sort of imagining how another person sees a situation. And these are really underlie a lot of communication, conflict resolution, and interpersonal interaction. So I wanted to take a second to say a few words about some of the questions you can be asking yourself. So one is to just test your assumptions. What assumptions am I making here? What evidence do I have for my thoughts or beliefs? Next is just imagining the other person's view. So how might this person think or feel about this situation, problem, or issue? And then the last one is to really self-reflect on things like, well, what am I really concerned about here? What do I really care about? Am I admitting the limits of my knowledge here? How could I be deceiving myself? these are sort of those internal sort of the thoughts and questions that you have in your own mind as you're going through these interpersonal dynamics. And now I'm reaching towards the last few slides. And here's other tips I always give early career researchers. So you've been told to develop your network. I'm just here to say yes. Do not underestimate the value and importance of developing your network early and often. Cultivate multiple mentors. Don't expect one or two people to be the super mentor that can provide you with all the mentoring you need. And also go to peers. Peers provide great mentoring. Learn to seek help and outside perspective or expertise. Know the resources available to your institution so you can tap into them. This is so hard. Learn to say no. Ask people you really respect who are more senior to you how they've done it. You can get some good insights. Don't forget to celebrate successes and small wins along the way, because our research is a lot of work. It's hard. There's a lot of setbacks. So not forgetting to stop and celebrate, even if it's in a small way. And that also builds team relationships to say, yeah, guys, we nailed it. Okay, now I'm on to the next thing. Attending to stress. In my coaching experience with researchers, when stress and anxiety get out of control, it's just really difficult to show up and be your best self. And it's very difficult to be an effective leader and to cultivate relationships in scientific teams when you're stretched so thin that you're just constantly operating on the pressure all the time. And relatedly, monitor your self-talk and practice self-compassion. So this is the idea is listen to the things you tell yourself. So an example would be negative self-talk would be something like, I've never done this before and I'll be bad at it. And positive would be something like, this is a wonderful opportunity for me and I'm going to learn from it and grow. And practice self-compassion is the idea, and I feel like it's useful to say this after 2 years of a pandemic, is the idea that you treat yourself with the same kindness you would treat others. So giving yourself a break and saying, no, you did your best, you're good, you're going to get this, you're going to get through this. Just giving yourself kindness. This is a list of references that kind of I've used in this presentation and that are useful future reading for you guys. A lot of these, if the title resonates, I encourage you to take a peek. Some of them are short. Call to action. Invest the time to prioritize in this human dimension of doing research. Involve ethicists and social scientists in projects and have ethics-related discussions throughout all phases. Last but not least, I'm going to leave you with 3 quotes. This first quote was actually something that one of my coaching clients said when he had this, I saw the light bulb moment. Like, I really feel like I saw it. We were in a Zoom call. And he was like, I just realized the problems that happened in my research center had to do with the dynamics of our team and the way people were interacting. And he said, it kind of makes me think of that Maya Angelou quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So we spent the rest of our coaching time together kind of trying to reverse engineer. How do you create a psychologically safe, positive team climate? And this is a good reminder. He cared about his people. It was clear. It was just he had never attended to this. He hadn't taken the time. He hadn't had training. He said, I wish I'd had this training 20 years ago. So it's just becoming really, really more and more important. And then I have 2 quotes from researchers who were part of a study that I did. And I think that they're good ending points. One is, rule number 1 is harmony. First and foremost, we have to get along. We have to respect each other. We have to trust each other. And then the last one is, I tried hard to be human. I was human first, and then I learned to be a scientist. So if I forget the human part, then that's a problem. And I worry about that all the time because the pressure's on us and it's so enormous you forget. With that, we have a few minutes for discussion, questions.
Alison, thank you so much. All of your tips come at a very important time for our biomedical data science innovation lab participants, because here in middle of June, we're going to be meeting here in Charlottesville, and many of them don't know each other. They're coming from different kind of universities and different lab cultures and different disciplines. Some are biomedical, some are ethicists, some are computer scientists and engineers and AI specialists, whatnot. And we're going to toss them into this big vat of intellectual awesomeness, and we're going to stir it all up. And out of that, we're really hoping that these new multidisciplinary teams are going to emerge around topics of mutual interest, and they're going to pursue these to hopefully take them through to either a really nice peer-reviewed publication or hopefully even better, an NIH grant around the topic that they have chosen. But because of this kind of, I don't know, accelerated process, some of these tips are really going to be important that they think about as they're forming these groups, because within 0 to 5 days, they're going to all of a sudden be working with a bunch of people they've never met before. So all of these are really, really important. In the normal process, when a grant is forming and whatnot, you've got a year to worry about it before the grant's due. Is that process any different than one that's a little more compressed, like, say 5 days? Would you see the time frame being an important variable?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So,
and you don't have to have an answer. That's okay.
Yeah, and that compressed format, you really have to reach some sort of mutual understanding and comfort and sense of comfort sharing ideas pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we, through the process, I'm hoping that people will kind of get there, but there's still just the general things of understanding each other, about how they make each other feel. And, one of the things we've worked very hard on is to try to identify folks who are really interested in team science. So we've sort of self-selected people from the get-go, but
so building in that self-selection will help, but two things come to mind. It's just being really intentional about how you could get to know each other quickly and start to build comfort. So 2 ways to do that would be to write even just a half page or 1 page bulleted point, nothing that's going to take all day, like team charter or like kind of team philosophy together to get talking about like, how are we going to make this work, and just hear each other's ideas. Another idea would be I wouldn't want to call it an icebreaker per se, because it just always has this negative, like, oh, icebreaker, but like some kind of activity. I was in a training program at Cold Spring Harbor Lab, and the first thing we did was get in small groups. So you could have the groups, get in these groups. And we talked about stories that had happened in our scientific career that taught us things that we'll never forget around interacting in scientific teams. Some of our stories were positive and some were like horror stories. And man, we bonded. It was like group therapy. And we just became instantly close in that cohort of about 30 people. And then we were in smaller teams of like 4 or so. So just being intentional about how to get people talking early and quickly, just to get to know each other as people and in their experience in the scientific environment. And then maybe doing like a short, simple activity of like, how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make sure we hear everybody's voices? Who's here at the table? Who do we have here?
What's important to keep the energy going? I mean, you kind of mentioned, a lot of meetings, documenting things. What else can one do to kind of keep the energy going after, because usually when you start something, there's a lot of energy, and it's like maintaining that is always such a challenge. Any recommendations?
So I do agree. I do think having some kind of routine meeting schedule that we're going to have, and then just say, we're going to touch base every 2 weeks or every month or every week, depends on your project and what your goals are. But having that scheduled, and then you can always say, no, we need to, you can always cancel it. But I am of the mind, if it's not on your calendar, if it's not on your agenda, it's not going to happen. And for at least the way we operate in our center, having those meetings creates sort of momentum and accountability. So, no one really loves to have like an extra meeting, but if you really care about a project and a team, making the time for that is really useful, acknowledging that you could cancel it if you needed to. And the other is maybe in that team charter, like what are our roles? Like, who is leading this team? Are we leading it collectively? Is it shared leadership? That might be fine, but sometimes that creates challenges where you don't really know who's moving the baton or who's responsible for scheduling the next meeting or who's responsible for checking in on what. So clarifying that, I think, helps the momentum going. Maybe you expressly say, one of our challenges is going to be keeping our momentum going. Who's going to be the momentum checker? Like, who's going to be the cheerleader? Who's going to be the champion? Like, does anyone want that role? And maybe their role is to say a few words at each meeting, or to send out just a brief email of some kind to just keep people connected. And I think that one positive thing with the COVID pandemic has been we are more familiar now with keeping connected remotely and through digital devices and through remote meetings. So leveraging some of that connectivity that we've learned to be able to do without being in person, using it wisely for our project teams, I think can really be a benefit.
I think one of the things which is interesting is that as we start to change from a pandemic-based, remote interaction model and coming back together to meet in person, we're going to have to relearn some of those group dynamics that, we may have, I don't know, we're out of practice. And
Yeah.
so it'll be an interesting experiment with our innovation lab activities to kind of see if people remember how to actually talk to one another in person. I think your tips are going to be very, very helpful as they do so.
I've heard people talking about having to keep eye contact and how that's unusual to them. And that could be your icebreaker, your group team building of like, wow, we're together. This is so exciting, but it also feels awkward. Like being vulnerable and saying, I feel like it's weird to keep eye contact with you right now, and is a way to build connection, just to start the conversation.
I love it. We may have to do that as an icebreaker. We'll see. Alison, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us on how to do this. We'll be going through this little experiment ourselves here in about a month and a half, and we're really looking forward to it, actually. Alison, thank you so much. Everyone, have a wonderful Friday.